Have you ever felt something quiet, unnameable, pulling at you from deep within, like a thread tied to your heart that stretches across time and space? Something that doesn't shout while demand your attention, but waits patiently, whispering in moments of silence when the world forgets to be loud. I have. And I didn't understand it, not at first, not for years. But now, after everything you've seen, after the war and the long road home, I know what it was. It was low, not just for the person, but for the life I was meant to live. For the part of me I tried to abandon, but which refused to be forgotten. You see, before I became a soldier, I was just another quiet boy from a sleepy town no one visits on purpose. My world was a handful of dusty streets, a crooked bookstore on a corner where time moved slower, and a creaky white house that always smelled faintly of pine and old books. My father ran a little repair shop, clocks mostly. He believed that every broken thing could be fixed if you just understood how it worked. My mother, with her soft hands and gentler voice, gave piano lessons to neighbors who couldn't afford them. Music poured from our windows like warm light, especially in the evenings when the world outside slowed to a hush. I did not fit in. Not in school. Not in the way boys in our town were supposed to be: loud, broad-shouldered, eager to impress with scraped knuckles and rude words. I was none of that. I liked quiet. I liked sitting in the tall grass behind the house with the notebook in my lap, sketching birds, clouds, while sometimes just shapes I didn't have names for yet. I would stay out there for hours, letting the wind carry my thoughts. Everyone thought I was wasting time, but it never felt wasted. Not to me. There was a girl, too. There always is, isn't there? Her name was Alara. She lived full streets over, wore her hair in a braid, and always had ink on her fingertips. She was the only person who ever asked to see my drawings. The first time I showed her, she held the sketchbook like it was something sacred. "You don't draw things," she said once, "you draw feelings." I didn't understand what she meant at the time, but I think she did. She always understood things before I did. Then the war began. It crept in at first, like a storm on a distant horizon. You hear the thunder, you feel the wind shift, but you don't believe it'll reach you. Until it does. Until it's everywhere. Until it's too late. The newspapers turned into lists of names, the radio hummed with speeches instead of music, and men began to disappear, first a few, then dozens. Boys from school, men from the town square. Gone. Off to serve. Off to fight. Off today. And I, God help me, I wanted to go too. Not out of bravery. Not even out of patriotism. I think I was just afraid. Afraid that I would be left behind while the world changed without me. That if I stayed, I would never become the man I was meant to be. That the quiet life I had, the sketchbooks, the soft hours with Alara, the broken clocks and piano songs, was somehow less than. So I lied to myself. Told myself I could leave all that behind, that I could silence the pull inside me and find something stronger out there. Something sharper. Something more real. I still remember the look on Alara's face when I told her I'd enlisted. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, long and silent, as if she were trying to memorize me. "You were leaving the part of you that matters most," she said. I didn't know how to respond, so I laughed and said something stupid about glory. She didn't laugh back. The day I left, the dawn was still asleep. My mother stood at the doorway, wringing a handkerchief. My father didn't say much, he just placed a small silver pocket watch in my hand. "To remind you that every second is a choice," he murmured. I didn't understand that either, not until much later. And so I boarded the train, the one filled with boys pretending to be men, our heads high and our hearts uneasy. As the engine hissed and pulled us away from everything we knew, I looked out the window, searching for one last glimpse of Alara. I never saw him. But I swear I felt something tug at my chest as the tracks began to blur behind me. Something like grief. Something like hesitation. Something like the beginning of a question I still hadn't found the words for. I didn't know it then, but that feeling, that gentle arche, that invisible pull, would follow me across continents and through the fire of war. When the smoke grew thick and the screams turned real, when the nights stretched so long they swallowed the sun, that pull remained. Quiet. Persistent. Undeniable. And it would save me. But it'll get to that in time. For now, I'll leave you with this. If you've ever felt that strange gravity in your chest, drawing you towards something soft and beautiful in a world that tries to harden you, don't ignore it, because that pull, however faint, might just be the only true thing you'll ever know. And it will never lead you astray. The first time I wore the uniform, I felt like an imposter. It itched at my skin, hung oddly on my frame, and turned me into something I wasn't. There was no ceremony, no music, no parade of pride to match the image the recruitment posters had painted. Just me standing in front of a cracked mirror in a dimly lit barracks room, staring at a version of myself I didn't recognize. I looked older already, even though only days had passed since I left home. Not because my face had changed, but because something had shifted behind my ears, like the first weight of a burden I didn't yet know the shape of. I was surrounded by boys just like me, most of them younger than they claimed, all of them caught in the semi-storm of fear and excitement. We laughed too loudly, punched sugars too hard, pretending we weren't scared. They shaved our heads, made us dress alike, yell in unison, and move like jeers in a well-oiled machine. They counted discipline, but it felt muddy like erasure. With every passing day, I felt the edges of my old self being roped smooth. The boy who stayed up past midnight sketching by candlelight, the boy who once held Alara's hand under the dogwood tree in the courtyard behind the church, he was fading. But even as they tried to mold us into weapons, there were moments they couldn't touch. In the early mornings, before the bugle, when the dew still clung to the grass and the world was quiet for just a few sacred breaths, I would wake before the others and stare out the window at the horizon. I don't know what I expected to see, perhaps some signal that it was still on the right path. Perhaps a sign from the part of me that still whispered in the dark. I never saw anything, of course. But I felt it like a heartbeat behind the silence. Like a hand pressing gently on my back, urging me not to forget who I was beneath the layers of camouflage. Letters from home were rare, but when they came, they felt like sunlight breaking through cloud. My mother's handwriting trembled on the page, full of small stories about the weather, the garden, the neighbors' gossip. My father never wrote directly, but she would mention things he said, how he'd repaired a watch and thought of me, how he'd kept my room clean. Alara's letters, though those were different. She didn't write often. And when she did, they weren't full of reassurances or small talk. They were filled with questions. Are you still drawing? What do the stars look like over there? Have you found anything beautiful in all that chaos? She never said she missed me. She didn't have to. Her words etched with it. But as the months passed, the letters slowed. Life on the front was not kind to sentiment. Days blurred into one another in a loop of drills, patrols, and exhausted silence. The older soldiers rarely spoke unless necessary, and when they did, their voices were clipped and distant. There was a look some of them wore, especially the ones who'd been deployed longer, eyes like dried riverbeds, all the life in them drained. I feared becoming like them. But I also feared not surviving long enough to find out. The first time we were deployed to an active zone, I didn't feel brave. I felt sick. My hands trembled as I loaded my weapon. My stomach twisted with every step toward the unknown. But I couldn't show it. Around me were faces just as folly, just as strained, but no one dared break the illusion of confidence. That's how it works. You become a mirror of the fear around you, hiding it behind performance. We walked like shadows into the war's mouth, each step taking us further from the world we had known. I remember the silence of that village more than anything, the eerie stillness of a place that had once held life. Burnt-out windows stared like hollow ears. A chilled stall, singed and missing an arm, lay abandoned on a stoop. The ski was too blue that day, too clean, like it hadn't gotten the message that the world had broken. We did not talk. We just moved. The mission was simple, secure, clear, report. But war is never simple. Not in truth. Not when your boots hit ground soaked with memory and ash. That night, we made camp in the ruins of a chapel. The roof was mostly gone, the altar broken in full. But the stained glass window behind it still held a few surviving fragments, and when the sun dipped low, it painted our ragged faces in fractured colors, reds, golds, blues. I sat there, staring at it, numb. Then, almost without thinking, I reached into my chest pocket and pulled out a stub of pencil and a crumpled piece of paper I'd kept hidden. I started to sketch. I don't know where I did it, maybe because the moment felt unreal and I needed to make it tangible. Maybe because something inside me still needed to make, even as everything around me was being unmade. I drew until night fell and the others slept. I drew that broken chapel, that stubborn light. And when I was done, I didn't feel whole, but I felt human. I felt like myself for the first time in weeks. That was when I realized the war had not taken everything. Not yet. There was still a part of me untouched. A part that responded to beauty, to memory, to something deeper than survival. That part, small, quiet, persistent, was still there, guiding me even when I didn't know it. I couldn't name it then. I didn't understand it, but in the months to come, as the war chewed through friends' aren't sanity, that pull, however faint, became the only compass I trusted. And I would learn to follow it not out of bravery, not out of duty, but because something inside me refused to die. It was a morning like so many others during those months of the war, drab, overcast, thick with the kind of silence that made you flinch before the first shot was even fired. The ski hung low over us like a lid, barely unthreatening, and the eve had that heavy, swollen stillness of something waiting to break. We moved in formation, boots squelching in the saturated earth, riffles gripped like lifelines, ears darting over every ruined structure and shadowed alleyway. The village we were ordered to clear had no name, at least not one we'd ever heard. Maybe once, before the war, it had been full of life. Children playing in the streets, old men smoking by the corners, women hanging out laundry on sunlit balconies. But now it was just brick and ash, a ghost town abandoned to the wind. It was eerily. Not even light yet. Dawn had barely begun to lift the black from the ski when the order came. Sweet and secure, Krisnik barked in that sandpaper voice of his. A is open. Don't think. Just move. I remember glancing at Rias, who gave me a half smile. He always did that before things got bad, like he was trying to convince himself we weren't walking into hell. Julian was behind me, quiet as always, barely more than a boy. His helmet sat too big on his head, and his hands never stopped shaking, even when he held them still. He used to hum softly at night, when he thought no one could hear him. Songs from back home. He had a little sister, I think. He used to write to Hev. The air was cold, the kind that slips down your neck and clings to your spine. My fingers were numb on my rifle, my shoulders tense. I remember thinking, not for the first time, I don't want to die here. Not here. Not in this place that smells like rotting plaster and burned wood. But you don't say those things out loud. You lock them away deep down, and you pretend that your heartbeat isn't loud enough to give away your position. we crossed the threshold into the village. The main road was littered with rubble and the corpses of cars long since stripped bare. Shattered glass crunched beneath our feet. We moved past the carcass of a bakery. Its walls half collapsed, floor sacks burst open like body guts, and I wondered if there had ever been laughter here. If someone had once fallen in love in this very street. If poor teenagers had once kissed beneath the broken clock tower now leaning dangerously to one side. The war had erased everything but the bonds. Then it happened. The first shot cracked the silence with a sound like lightning splitting the air. Someone screamed. Then came the staccato burst of gunfire from multiple angles. It wasn't chairs at first, it was precision. An ambush. They had been waiting for us. Positioned above us, behind booths, around corners. The entire village seemed to erupt in fire. Kresnik yelled for us to fan out, but the orders were drowned out by the roar of bullets and the hiss of incoming mortars. I dropped instantly, my chest slamming into the cold dirt, heart in my throat. The world tilted. Screams ripped through the air. I couldn't tell who was shouting and who was dying. I turned just in time to see Simmons, tall, gentle Simmons, drop to the ground like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Blood blossomed from his back in a hot spray, his face frozen mid-turn. I opened my mouth to shout, but no sound came out. My rifle was up, my finger on the trigger, but I couldn't see who I was firing at. Just shadows darting through ruins, muscle flashes, the stench of gunpowder and blood. Everything became fragmented, movement, sound, instinct. Julian fell beside me, clutching his leg, screaming. I crawled to him without thinking, dragging myself across the broken pavement, bullets chewing through the space I had just occupied. His leg was torn open, raged flesh and exposed bone, and his mouth was wide with horror. "It hurts," he kept saying. "It hurts, I can't," go over and over, like a prayer gone wrong. I pressed gauze to the wound, my hands slick with blood, whispering, stay with me, just keep talking." Reese appeared beside me then, yelling for cover, pointing to the second floor of a bombed-out hotel. He fired, fast and sure, then dragged Julian back by the arms while I covered them. My rifle jammed, and for a heartbeat, I was just standing there, exposed, breath caught in my throat. Then Kresnik slammed into me from behind, knocking me down just as a bullet screamed past where my head had been. We landed hard. He didn't even look at me. Just growled, "Get your shit together," and kept firing. We retreated slowly, leaving behind 4 bodies we couldn't reach. The enemy had melted into the buildings as quickly as they had appeared, shadows in a dying dome. We holed up in what remained of the chapel. Its roof was gone, but the walls still held. We stepped Deborah's on upturned pews as barricades, Reese swearing softly under his breath as he checked Julian's wound again. Kresnik lit a cigarette with shaking hands, his face streaked with dirt and blood. No one spoke of Simmons. What of the others? We just sat in that broken place, the stained glass above us cracked and half melted from fire. The Virgin Mary watching us with a sorrowful gaze that seemed to understand everything and forgive nothing. Night fell, and the cold came again. I sat outside the circle of firelight, away from the others. I couldn't stop seeing it, Simmons falling, Julian screaming, the way the bullets cut the silence apart like scissors through cloth. My hands still shook. I reached into my chest pocket and pulled out the little scrap of paper I'd kept hidden, the sketch of Alara's face, worn thin from my fingers. Somehow, through the blood and the running and the madness, it had survived. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up a stick and began drawing in the dirt. Not much. Just lines. A jawline. The curve of a cheek. Teeth here. Head AS. Every stroke steadied me, brought me back. The others probably thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. For a little while, I could feel his there, feel myself, the real me, not the one the war had tried to turn me into. I realized in that moment that the war hadn't fully taken me yet. That no matter how loud the guns got, no matter how much blood sucked the soil beneath my boots, there was still something inside me that remembered booty. That still needed booty. That quaint pull, the one that had followed me from home, that whispered through Alara's letters, through the memory of head lauder, through the motion of my pencil and the feel of wind in a summer field, it was still there. And it had saved me. Not from the bullets, not from the pain, but from forgetting who I was, from becoming hollow. I lay down in the dirt and stared at the sky until the stars appeared, faint and trembling above the smoke. And I remember thinking, this can't be all there is. There must be more than this. There must be something worth surviving for, something that calls us forward, even through fire. I didn't know it yet, but I was already following it even then. Even there. The strange, silent pull of what I really loved. Night settled over the shattered village with a strange, almost surreal softness, as if the earth itself was trying to soothe the wounds inflicted during the brutal day. The smoky sky hung heavy and low, pressing down on us like a thick, suffocating blanket, but within that suffocation was a fragile, fragile silence. The war had taken its toll, carving grief into every broken wall and cracked window pane. The farmhouse we had claimed as shelter was nothing more than a skeleton of its former self, with jagged holes in the roof where sunlight once filtered through, and the scars of shellfire and gunfire riddling every surface. Yet it was shelter, and for tonight, it was home. I sat on a splintered wooden crate just inside the hollowed remains of the kitchen, my back against the wall, my body etching in places I hadn't known were sore. The adrenaline that had kept me moving through the firefight finally faded, leaving behind a deep, bone-deep exhaustion. My hands no longer trembled as violently, but a dull numbness had settled over them, like the calm after a storm, uneasy and unnatural. The others were spread out across the ruined floor, some sitting silently, others lying on makeshift beds of tattered blankets and broken furniture, attempting to find sleep amid the rubble and despair. Reyes, the astronomy-obsessed soldier whose mind often seemed to drift light years away even in the middle of combat, was quietly tending to Julian's wound, his fingers deft and gentle as he pressed gauze into the torn flesh. I watched him for a while, noticing how his eyes flickered toward the shattered ceiling whenever he thought no one was looking. I suspected he was searching for the stars, the ones we couldn't see from the ground, obscured by smoke and war's bitter hedge, but which he clung to as reminders of a universe bigger than all his chairs. As the camp slowly fell into restless slumber, Rees slipped away and beckoned me quietly to follow. Without a word, he carried his telescope to the courtyard, a battered, heavy thing that seemed out of place amidst the ruin, but to him was a sacred artifact. He set it down on a flat stone bathed in moonlight and wiped the lens with the cloth, the soft swish of fabric, the only sound breaking the stillness. His movements were reverent, as if preparing for the ritual. He gestured for me to look first, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. I knelt beside him, breathed shallow, and peered into the eyepiece. What I saw stole the breath from my lungs. 3 brilliant points of light, perfectly aligned, glowing against the endless black canvas of the night. Orion's belt, he whispered. 3 stars, Betelgeuse, Rigel, and Bellatrix, burning fiercely in the cold void, utterly indifferent to the suffering below. For a moment, I forgot where I was. I forgot the mud beneath my knees, the echoes of gunfire in my ears, the heavy archie in my chest. I saw instead the golden light of my childhood, the sun-dappled feast where Eller and I had wandered, the crisp pages of poetry she'd read aloud on lazy afternoons, the feeling of endless possibility and quiet love. The stars felt like a bridge, connecting this broken present to a past I'd thought lost forever. Reyes looked up from the telescope, his expression softening. "They are always there," he said, voice barely a whisper. "Even when we can't see them." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle inside me. In the vast silence of that night, under a sky that had witnessed countless wars and wonders, I felt a strange kinship with him and with all the souls who had ever looked up and found hope in those distant fires. We took turns at the telescope, speaking in low tones about constellations and dreams, about lives left behind and futures hoped for. He told me stories of ancient stargazers who used those very stars to navigate deserts or no scenes to find their way home. I thought of my father's pocket watch ticking steadily in my pocket, a reminder that every moment was a choice, every breath a chance to steer my own course. Here, beneath the fractured sky, I understood that despite the war's darkness, a light entered inside me, pulling me towards something beyond survival. When we finally packed the telescope away, the chill of the night crept deeper into my bones. But the sky no longer felt like a void. It was a vast, unbroken tapestry of possibility, and I was a thread woven into its fabric. I lay back on the cold stones, staring up as the stars faded behind a veil of smoke, their steady glow lingering in my mind's eye. That night, for the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to hope. Hope that this war would not define me. That the strange, silent pull inside the low fort home, Fort Alera, for the life I yearned to reclaim, would guide me through the darkness. That no matter what happened, I would not lose sight of the light. And in that quiet, etching hope, I found a kind of beast. The days that followed were slow, grinding ache, a merciless march through mud, ruin, and relentless tension that wore down body and soul alike. Each step was heavier than the last, as if the earth itself tried to pull us under, reminding us how fragile and fleeting our lives had become in this forsaken place. The firefight had carved scars into more than just skin. It left wounds etched deep in our minds, silent shadows lurking beneath the surface of every glance, every quiet moment between comments. Julian's limp was a daily reminder of how easily flesh could break, how vulnerable we all were, walking the razor's edge between life and death with nothing but a riffle and luck to protect us. The war was an unfeeling machine, grinding forward with indifferent precision, casting men like us into its cogs with no regard for who we once were or who we might become. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of despair, something inside me refused to be swallowed whole. It was that small, defiant spark, a memory of that fragile night beneath the stars, the gentle faith Reese held in a universe that kept spinning despite the cheers below. That memory was a lifeline I clung to in the depths of exhaustion and fear. It was the whisper of something beyond the smoke, beyond the bullets, beyond the endless grey. One a particularly bleak morning, after a patrol surges through with cold rain that seeped into our bones and chilled us to the marrow, I found myself wandering away from the others toward a slow-moving creek. The water was murky and swollen from recent storms, cutting a silver thread through the barren land, singing a song far older than this war, a song of persistence, of life that refuses to be snuffed out even when the world is tearing itself apart. I settled on a moss-covered rock by the bank, pulled out my battered sketchbook, its pages worn, edges curled, smudged with dirt and rain, and, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to draw not the desolation surrounding us, but something else. Alera's face, yes, but also the distant stars I launched for, the slow ripple of the creek, the fragile glint of light caught on a leaf or a droplet of rain. As the pencil traced familiar lines, a quiet, undeniable truth began to settle in my mind. These small moments, the beauty snatched from the jaws of destruction, the pull toward what we love, were what kept us human. They were the threads that tethered us to life and meaning, waving a fragile web strong enough to hold against despair. I remembered a phrase I'd heard long ago but never truly understood until now. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. Those words whispered to me through the rain, through the mud, through the dull ache that lingered in my bones. They wrapped around me like a sacred promise, a compass pointing towards something worth fighting for. Alera filled my thoughts, the warmth of head hand in mine, head quite low, the soft cadence of head voice reading poetry beneath the dogwood tree. She was no longer just a memory. She had become a beacon, a steady current pulling me back from the brink. This pull was different from the call of duty or the noise of orders shouted over gunfire. It was silent, strange, and persistent, the kind of call that reached beyond reason and fear. Later that day, as we slouched through another ruined village whose name I would never learn, the air was thick with smoke and tension. Every shadow held a threat, every creak and whisper potential enemy. We moved with the practiced caution of men who knew death could arrive at any moment, unannounced and merciless. And yet, amid the wreckage and ruin, something remarkable happened, a glimpse of hope piercing the darkness. I saw her from the corner of my eye, a small child, no more than 5, peeking out from behind a crumbling wall. Her eyes were wide, reflecting fear and curiosity in equal measure. Our gazes locked, and in that instant, something unspoken passed between us. She stepped forward hesitantly and held out a small bundle wrapped in tattered cloth. I approached slowly, hands raised in peace, and she handed me a single, faded wildflower. Its petals were fragile but vivid, a stubborn splash of life against the grey backdrop of death. That tiny, trembling gesture struck me harder than any bullet. It was a declaration that even here, in the heart of devastation, life reached out with tender defiance. Love reached out, quietly, persistently. The strange pull I had been chasing wasn't some distant dream or fleeting memory. It was real, breathing, waiting in the most unexpected places. That flower was a reminder that hope can grow in the harshest soil, that beauty can bloom even amid ruin. That night, back at camp, I sat by the flickering light of a makeshift lamp and wrote in my journal. The pages were worn, but the words poured out with the clarity I hadn't known I still possessed. I realized I had been running, not away from the war itself, but toward the strange, silent pull. Toward the low and beauty that survived despite the blood and destruction. It was a force quieter than the roar of guns, but infinitely more powerful. It had saved me, sustained me, and I vowed to follow it wherever it might lead, no matter how uncertain the path or how strange the journey. Because in the end, I came to understand a profound truth. It is not the loudest call that saves us, but the quiet whinny that never leaves our side. The strange pull of what we truly love will guide us through darkness, pain, and fear. It will not lead us astray. The weeks that unfolded after that fragile night beneath the shattered farmhouse blurred into an endless cycle of muddy boots, whispered prayers, and the constant brim of war pressing in from every direction. Each dawn brought with it the relentless grind of patrols and skirmishes, the dull itch of loss growing heavier in my chest with every passing day. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of it all, that strange, silent pull within me anchored by memories of Alara, the stars overhead, and the fragile bloom handed to me by the child in the ruined village, steadied my heart. It was a tether to a part of myself that the war sought to suffocate, a sacred flame refusing to be extinguished by the fire of violence. One morning, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and rain-soaked grass, the sky still bruised with heavy clouds that dulled the light of the rising sun. Our unit was tasked with the reconnaissance patrol through a stretch of countryside that had seen its share of devastation. The landscape was scarred, craters pocked the feast like the wounds of some great beast, and the skeletal remains of trees cloud upward against the grey sky. But amid the ruin, life whispered stubbornly. Wildflowers, in hues of purple and gold, pushed defiantly through cracks in the soil, delicate yet unyielding against the desolation. As we moved cautiously through this scarred land, my mind drifted to Alara, the softness in her gaze, the quiet hope that had shone in her eyes the last time we were together before I was sent away. The memory was a balm against the cold reality around me, a warmth in the chill that seeped into my bones. Suddenly, a faint rustling sound in the underbrush snapped me back to the present. I raised my rifle slowly, signaling the men to halt, muscles coiled and ears sharp for any sign of danger. From behind a tangle of brambles, a small figure emerged, a girl no older than 7 or 8, clutching a battered doll whose porcelain face bore cracks and smudges of dirt. Head wide eyes met mine, steady and unafraid, mingling curiosity with an innocence untouched by the horrors around us. Time seemed to slow, the distant sounds of the patrol fading into silence. I lowered my rifle carefully, stepping forward with open palms to show I meant no harm. Without hesitation, the girl reached into the folds of her threadbare dress and produced a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside were wildflowers, wilted but vibrant, and a few scraps of worn fabric. She extended the bundle toward me, a silent offering in the midst of chairs. I took it gently, the rough texture of the petals and the softness of the cloth grounding me in a world that still held moments of grace. That simple act, a child's gift amidst destruction, felt like a rebellion against the war itself. As dusk fell, casting long shadows over the battered village where we made camp, I sat by the flickering firelight, the wildflowers cradled carefully in my hands. Their colors were muted by dust and time, yet they held a fragile beauty that defied the ruin around us. I thought deeply about the strange pull, the quaint force within that had drawn me to this place, that urged me toward life, toward love, toward hope. I pulled out my sketchbook, its worn pages a canvas for these small miracles, and began to draw. Each careful stroke traced the delicate curves of petals and slender stems, a quiet act of defiance against the desolation that sought to swallow us whole. Rees approached then, his telescope slung casually over one shoulder, his gaze gentle as he peered over my shoulder. "You hold on to the small things," he said softly, "because they remind you who you are." His words resonated deeply. The war could tear down cities, shatter bodies, and crush spirits, but it could never erase the memories, the hopes, the love that tethered us to one another and to a world beyond the smoke and blood. That night, beneath a fragile canopy of stars struggling to shine through drifting smoke, the strange pull felt more real, more urgent than ever before. It was no longer just a memory what a fleeting hope. It was a guiding force, a compass pointing me toward a future beyond the carnage. I understood then, with the clarity that pierced the fog of war, that no matter how deep the darkness pressed against me, that pull, the love and beauty I carried within, would never lead me astray. As I lay beneath the night sky, the stars above seemed to burn brighter, their silent light a promise and a reassurance. I whispered a vow to myself, a quiet pledge to follow that strange, silent call wherever it might lead, to hold fast to the love and beauty that survived even here, in the heart of destruction. And as my eyes closed, the steady glow of those distant fires lingered in my mind, lighting a path through the shadows, guiding me home. The days that followed stretched into a relentless expanse of grey, each one folding into the next with the semi-unyielding rhythm of movement, noise, and exhaustion. The war was a grinding machine, and it devoured everything: time, hope, even the very essence of who I was. Every morning, I woke to the cold bite of fear lurking beneath my skin. Every night, I fell into a restless sleep haunted by echoes of gunfire and the faces of those lost. It felt as if the world itself was narrowing, closing in around me, threatening to smother the fragile spark I had carried with me since that first night beneath the stars. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of despair and relentless danger, the strange pull inside me, the quiet, persistent force drawing me toward what I truly love, refused to falter. Instead, it grew stronger with every passing moment, a silent beacon shining through the suffocating fog of war. One particular afternoon remains vivid in my mind, a rare pause in the chairs. We were moving cautiously through a dense thicket at the edge of the front lines, the forest thick with ancient trees whose tangled branches wove a canopy so tight that only slavers of sunlight pierced through. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth, crushed leaves, and the metal-like tang of distant gunfire. My unit had spread out ahead and behind me, like shadows slipping through the underbrush, their footsteps muffled by the carpet of decaying foliage. For a moment, I found myself alone, a fleeting breath of solitude in the relentless march. I stopped, lowering my rifle, and allowed myself to breathe deeply, inhaling the wet, rich scent of the forest floor. The usual cacophony of birdsong and rustling wildlife was conspicuously absent, silenced by the oppressive presence of war. But as I stood there, straining my ears to catch any sign of life, a soft rustle whispered through the leaves. The faintest breeze stirred the branches above, carrying with it the distant, lonely call of a bird, a fragile thread of sound in a world otherwise muted. It was a reminder that despite the violence, despite the darkness pressing in from all sides, life endured. Persistent. Unyielding. Closing my ears, I let the sensations of the forest wash over me, the damp coolness against my skin, the scent of moss and pine, the gentle sway of the branches overhead. Within that quiet, the strange pull inside me stirred anew, a gentle, insistent tug that felt less like a thought and more like a brief, an unspoken invitation to follow. Then, through the break in the branches, a shaft of sunlight fell onto the forest floor, illuminating a small cluster of wildflowers growing stubbornly amidst the shadows. Their petals, brilliant shades of violet and gold, seemed almost unnatural in their vividness against the muted greens and browns of the underbrush. Kneeling beside them, I placed my fingers lightly on the soft leaves, feeling the cool earth beneath my palm, so alive and real in contrast to the chills that surrounded us. For a moment, it was as if the war fell away, and I was simply a man in a forest, marveling at the simple miracle of life. Sitting there, memories surged forth like a tide. Elera's warm smile beneath the dogwood tree, the softness of her hand in mine, the way her voice had sounded reading poetry beneath the stars. The strange pull inside me was no longer a distant whisper. It had become a clarion call, a summons to reclaim the part of myself that the war sought to crush and bury. It was a beckoning toward hope, toward the possibility of a future beyond the endless cycle of blood and fear. I carefully gathered a few of the wildflowers, mindful not to crush their fragile stems, and tucked them gently into the pocket of my jacket. The simple act of holding those blooms felt like an affirmation of life, a quiet rebellion against the devastation that pressed in on all sides. Raising to my feet, a renewed sense of purpose settled over me, not just the raw desire to survive, but a deeper resolve to live for something more. The war was far from over, but I was no longer merely a soldier caught in its jeers. I was a man guided by a force stronger than fear or duty, a force rooted in love and the silent, strange pull that had carried me through darkness. As I moved back toward the others, the weight of the wildflowers in my pocket was a constant comfort, a tangible reminder of hope nestled amid the ruins. That night, under a sky ablaze with stars that seemed to burn brighter despite the smoke, I found a quiet corner of our battered camp and lit a candle. By its flickering light, I opened my journal and began to write, the words flowing freely, carried on the wave of clarity that had settled in my heart. I wrote of the strange pull that had drawn me through the shadows, the love that had anchored me in chaos, and the unshakable promise that no matter how fierce the storm, it would never lead me astray. In that still moment, beneath the vast, indifferent universe, I understood the profound power of that pull. It was more than feeling, it was a force that sustained me, healed me, and guided me through the darkest nights. It was the invisible thread that connected me to Elera's laughter, to the stars overhead, to the wildflowers blooming stubbornly in the shadows of war. And it was the light that would someday lead me home. The war had a way of twisting, unfolding time like a shattered mirror, days bleeding into nights, moments stretching and contracting until everything felt both impossibly distant and crushingly immediate all at once. Amid the ceaseless chaos, the roar of gunfire, the acrid smoke, the cries of the wounded, something inside me was quietly, irrevocably shifting. That strange pull had come to recognize the silent, steady tug toward what I truly loved was no longer just a faint whisper in the background of my mind. It had become a steady, insistent current, drawing me not just away from destruction, but toward a deeper sense of purpose, a vision of a life beyond the endless battlefield. That realization came slowly, during a night much like so many others, yet different in ways I couldn't fully grasp at first. After a grueling day of patrols through feasts scarred with shell holes and the village reduced to smoldering ruins, I found myself sitting alone by the dying embers of a campfire. The cold bit into my skin despite the flickering warmth of the flames. The men around me had long since fallen into restless, uneasy sleep, shadows huddled beneath threadbare blankets, haunted by their own memories and fears. But I was wide awake, staring upward at the sky. The havens were a patchwork of smoke on clear stretches, the stars fighting to shine through the hedge. Each pinpoint of light burned with a quiet insistence, as if reminding me that despite everything, the war, the death, the endless darkness, some things endured. They endured beyond the reach of bullets and bombs, beyond the cruelty of man, beyond even the limits of my own pain. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the rough fabric a poor shield against the chill, and reached into my pocket. My fingers brushed against the wilted wildflowers I'd gathered days ago, the fragile reminders of hope and defiance I had kept with me, cradled like sacred talismans. I closed my eyes and let the memory of Alara wash over me, the softness of his smile, the strength in his steady gaze, the way she believed in a world where peace and beauty could flourish even in the darkest times. That memory was a balm, soothing the raw, jagged edges of my soul. From the shadows, I felt movement before I sight Reese appeared beside me, silent as a ghost, but carrying the semi-weariness that had begun to settle deep into my bones. He sat down without a word, and for a while, we simply watched the stars emerge, their light flickering through the smoke like distant promises. The silence between us was not empty, it was full of shared understanding, unspoken fears, and the fragile hope we both clung to. After what felt like hours, Reese broke the silence. "It's that strange pull, isn't it?" he said softly, voice barely more than a whisper. "The one that keeps us going when everything else tries to tear us apart." I nodded, my throat tight with emotion. "It's more than hope," I replied. "It's like a compass. Something inside us that knows the way, even when the path is lost in shadows." He smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the stars above. "Yes, it's the part of us that refuses to be swallowed by the war. The part that remembers who we are beneath the armor, beneath the fear." We talked then, really talked, for the first time in weeks. About life, about those strange, silent forces that guide us when the world seems to be falling apart. Reese shared stories of distant galaxies, of ancient peoples who looked to the stars not just for navigation, but for meaning and hope. His words painted pictures of light waving through darkness, of constellations tracing patterns of struggle and triumph across the sky. I listened, feeling myself drawn into that vast tapestry, a single thread woven into a design far larger than the battlefield beneath us. As the night deepened and the embers died down to ash, I felt the pull inside me grow stronger, not a fragile thread, but a sturdy rope anchoring me to a future worth living for. I understood then, with the clarity that cut through the fog of war, that this force was no mere refuge or fleeting feeling. It was a universal truth, a guiding light that could carry us through even the darkest nights, the deepest fears, and the fiercest battles. When dawn finally broke, spilling body pink and gold across the scared earth, I rose with a renewed sense of purpose. The war still raged around me. The path ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and filled with unknowns. But I carried within me the unshakable knowledge that the strange pull of what I truly loved, the love for Alara, for life, for hope, would never lead me astray. It was my compass in the chaos, my strength in despair, my reason to keep moving forward, toward peace, toward home, toward a life waiting beyond the smoke and blood. The weight of war bore down on me like a suffocating shroud, pressing relentlessly against my chest with every breath. Days melted into nights in a never-ending cycle of violence and uncertainty, and it seemed as though the very fabric of my being was fraying under the strain. Yet, amid the endless cacophony of gunfire, the cries of the wounded, and the haunting silence that followed, there was one constant, a strange, silent pull deep within me. It was a force that neither bullets nor bombs could shatter, a quiet beacon that refused to be extinguished. That pull was the tether to what I truly loved, and it was the slender thread that held me together when everything else threatened to unravel. One evening, after a brutal clash that left us reeling, I found myself separated from my comrades, wandering alone through the ruins of a village that had once been alive with laughter and life. The air was thick with the choking scent of smoke and ash, the ground littered with splintered wood, broken glass, and the remnants of shattered homes. The silence was eerie, deafening in its emptiness. As I moved cautiously through the wreckage, each footstep felt like a betrayal to the memories buried beneath the rubble, the memories of families, celebrations, and the simple joys that war had cruelly stolen. Then, amid the desolation, I caught sight of something so fragile and unexpected it took my breath away, a tiny green spurt pushing stubbornly through a cracked patch of earth. Its delicate leaves reached tentatively toward the fading light of dusk, as if defying the very destruction that surrounded it. Kneeling beside that sprout, I was overwhelmed by a surge of emotion, a fierce, almost desperate hope that seemed to rise from the earth itself. That small plant, fragile as it was, embodied resilience. It was a whisper of life refusing to be silenced, a testament to the enduring power of renewal even in the darkest places. As I sat there, the memories came rushing back with vivid clarity, Elara's gentle smile, the warmth of her hand wrapped around mine, the nights spent beneath endless skies speckled with stars that seemed to promise something better. The strange pull that had led me through months of fear and uncertainty was not a fleeting feeling or wishful thinking, it was a force woven into the very core of my existence. It was hope, yes, but more than that, it was the essence of what it meant to be human. It was the compass that kept me oriented when everything else fell away. Returning to camp, I carried that spark within me like a precious flame, determined to nurture it even as the war threatened to snuff it out. In the days that followed, I began to notice the small, miraculous moments that glimmered like stars against the dark canvas of conflict. The infectious laughter of a child playing amid rubble, the unexpected kindness from a weary stranger, the steadfast camaraderie of soldiers who refused to give up on each other despite the horrors we faced. Each moment was a thread, weaving a tapestry of survival and humanity, a reminder that love and hope could not only endure but flourish in the most unlikely places. One night, as a cold wind whispered through the flaps of our tents and the sky above shimmered with the scattering of stars, I found myself alone with my journal. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the pages as I poured out my soul, recording the turmoil, the fears, the moments of grace that had begun to define my journey. I wrote about the strange pull that had carried me through the darkest nights, the love that had anchored me amid chaos, and the unshakable conviction that following what we truly love would never lead us astray. That belief became my shield against despair, my guiding light through the relentless night. It was a quiet, powerful force that transcended pain and fear, leading me forward even when the path was obscured by smoke and sorrow. No matter how deep the darkness pressed against me, I knew with unwavering certainty that the strange pull, this deep, silent compass, would carry me toward healing, toward peace, and toward a life where love could finally take root and grow. And so, with that knowledge burning fiercely within me, I faced each new day not simply as a soldier surviving the horrors of war, but as a man drawn inexorably, silently, unerringly toward the life he was meant to live, the life waiting beyond the blood and shadow, waiting to be claimed by the pull of what he truly loved. The war was finally drawing to a close, what at least, that's what the whispers on the wind promised. The relentless thunder of artillery fire had begun to fade into the distance, replaced by an uneasy silence that settled like a heavy fog over the battered land. Standing on the edge of a battlefield once alive with chaos and carnage, I watched as the sun dipped low behind a horizon scarred by fire and blood. The earth beneath my feet was cracked and blackened, strewn with the remnants of shattered homes and the echoes of lives uprooted. Around me, the world was exhausted, drained by the violence it had witnessed. And yet, beneath the rubble, beneath the dust and decay, something deeply alive stirred within me, a quiet strength, born from the strange pull that had carried me through every harrowing day and night. I thought back over the long, winding path that had led me to this moment, the endless marches through mud and rain, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the air, the nights spent huddled beneath cold, star-studded skies whispering promises of peace. I remembered the faces of comrades fallen and friends made, the laughter shared amidst the fear, and the small acts of kindness that had kept my spirit tethered to hope. That strange pull, the silent, persistent force rooted deep within my soul, had been my compass through the darkness. It had been the invisible thread waving meaning into the chaos, reminding me of who I was beneath the grime and fear, beneath the uniform and the weapon. Now, standing alone amid the ruins, I felt a profound clarity settle over me like a balm. The war had taken so much, the learned, the innocence, the lives of too many, but it could not take the love that had sustained me, the hope that had lit my path like a distant star. That strange pull was not just a fleeting feeling or desperate clinging to survival. It was a truth as old as time itself. To follow what we truly love is to find our way home, no matter how far or lost we may feel. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the wildflowers I had gathered long ago, their petals now brittle and faded but still fragrant with the memory of life. Holding them close, I let the weight of their fragile beauty remind me of everything I had fought for and everything I still carried inside. My heart ached for Alara, for the friends who would never see another dawn, for the countless souls caught in the web of war. But with the Achi came resolve, a promise that their memories would live on, not as shadows of sorrow, but as sparks of light guiding me forward. Lifting my gaze, I looked to the sky, now a vast canvas of deep indigo studded with countless stars that shimmered like distant beacons. The constellations traced ancient patterns, stories of struggle and triumph woven into their light. I whispered a vow soft but unbreakable, not just to myself, but to Alara, to my fallen comrades, and to the life waiting patiently beyond the smoke and ruin. I promised to follow that strange pull with quiet courage, to let it guide me beyond the scars and shadows toward healing and peace. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be wounds to mend, both visible and unseen. Memories would rise like coasts demanding reckoning, and the world would need rebuilding, not just in bricks and mortar, but in hearts and minds. Yet, with that strange pull as my compass, I knew I would never lose my way again. It was the force that had carried me through the darkest nights, the light that would lead me out of the war's long shadow and into the life I was meant to live, the life waiting for me to come home, waiting to be claimed with open arms and a hopeful heart.